Welcome to my best of round 2 report. I'm going to show you Magnus Carlsen's first game and then a couple of sparkling moments from a couple of other encounters. So, first of all, Magnus Carlsen, world champion, stepped into the arena in round 2. He sat out game 1. And Norway were facing Bangladesh. So, well, Bangladesh have a couple of decent players. On top board, Carlsen faced Enamul Hossain, who's rated 2431. Okay, there's a gulf in class between these two players, but a 2400 player, still decent player. And Bangladesh have, for example, Niaz Murshid, a veteran player now, but who's also quite decent. So, you know, this is, for Norway, still, well, clearly favourites, but not such a simple match. Anyway, Carlsen, with the white pieces, started with pawn to e3. Now this, even for Carlsen, who's played, well, almost every single decent first move with white, this is a first time for him. There's nothing wrong with e3, of course. It will probably transpose into another opening, and that's exactly what happened. Well, I say another opening, transpose into an orthodox opening. And that's what we got. It transposed very quickly into a Nimzo-Indian, actually. I mean, black can play d5 here and get a kind of Queen's Indian, but Hossain preferred to play bishop b4, and now this is a standard line from the Nimzo-Indian. I used to play this myself with black, actually. The b6 variation against the Rubinstein. And this is a very well-known position. And here Carlsen castles, so this is a pawn sacrifice, probably not very good to accept this sacrifice. And here, well, I seem to remember playing this with black, and it's sort of well known that the most accurate move here is to play f5, just supporting the knight and keeping your options open, because it's still possible to accept this pawn sacrifice. So, you know, white can't, you know, just play any old move here. The main line is queen c2, and then black will exchange on c3 and castles. And, well, it's a very double-edged position, actually. It's a very interesting position. But Hossain played, I think, inaccurately here. He took on c3. And then he castled. Now the difference is that white doesn't have to play queen c2 here, and Carlsen exploited this little move order inaccuracy and played knight e1. Yeah, I mean, black can't take on c3 now because of queen c2. And now, for example, there's a very old game, Geller against Kramer from 1952, that went f5 and then f3. And the knight went back. Well, you can see that, you know, this is a superior version of the line I just showed, because white hasn't had to commit the queen. But that's still, f5 is what black should play here. Instead, Hossain, after 12 minutes thought, played c5, but this really allows white a very nice position. So simply f3. The knight drops back, and then e4. Incidentally, there's a little trick here. If the knight goes back to d6, which is sometimes possible to attack this pawn, but unfortunately this doesn't work, because there's a little tactical trick, bishop h7 followed by queen d6, and that's a fairly healthy extra pawn for white. So the knight went back to f6, and now Carlsen played e4. So white really has a very nice position already. There's a threat to pin this knight. White has a superb centre, and the difference between this kind of position and many other standard Nimzo positions is that there is no real pressure against the c4 pawn. So white just has 2 bishops, nice centre, great position already. Hossain played knight e8 to prevent that pin. Now Carlsen just closed the position with d5. Why not? Just shuts out this bishop. This bishop just not very well placed at all here. So with 2 bishops, beautiful pawn centre, nice space, then white is obviously better here. Carlsen fought for 13 minutes here, just working out his middle game plan. Knight c2, and this swings round into the middle. Beautiful square for the knight on e3, covering c4 and d5, but also obviously looking at the king side as well. And now the knight came off the back rank. a4 from Carlsen, played very quickly, and here's another very interesting moment in the game. Why was a4 played? Well, sometimes you can break open the queen side with a5, but I'm not sure that was really Carlsen's intention. I think black, to keep any sort of hope alive in this position, I think he should play knight e5. That bishop ducks back, and then knight g6. And this gives black just a little bit more freedom. Probably white would play something like g3 to stop that knight coming into f4. But I think it's important for black to keep the option open of opening the queen side. Sometimes even playing moves like a6 and eventually a b5, just maybe to get a hit at d5. I mean, I think white has a great position here, but at least Carlsen still has to weigh up. Do you play on the king side? Do you play on the queen side? How exactly do you play this position? But instead, Hussein played a very kind of automatic move, a5. Now this particular structure here with these pawns is very well known in the Nimzo Indian. You might recall a very famous game from the Fischer-Spassky World Championship match in 1972, where Fischer closed the position with a5 and later went on to attack that pawn on a4. But so, I mean, maybe Hussein has a kind of memory in his mind of that position, but a5 here is not appropriate because basically it closes the queen side and gives Carlsen a free hand on the other side of the board. Carlsen played rook a2 here, so this rook, as we'll see, preparing to sweep across the board. And I think knight e5 is still appropriate here, but queen c7 played, and now after f4, I think basically black is lost in this position because he has no real counterplay. There's no counterplay on the queen side, and white just has a free roll on the king side. Let's see what happens. So exchange on d5 doesn't really change the position too much. In fact, opens up the bishop's diagonal. And now g4. Very interesting to see that Carlsen played these next few moves basically instantly. He realizes that black has no counterplay here. If that knight comes into e4, then simply queen c2 and problems on h7. So knight f8, and now here we go. The pawns roll forward. Knight e4 still not possible because of queen c2. h4. It's just a classic kingside pawn storm, and black has absolutely no counterplay. And Carlsen playing these moves instantly. Now he thought for a moment, because having advanced these pawns, he now needs to think, how exactly am I going to break through? This is, of course, his classic strategy when you're facing a pair of knights. You take away the knight squares. You can see none of these squares available for black's knights. Knight g4, and now rook g2. So this rook has a nice swing across the board, and already there are threats to play moves like knight f6 or knight h6, depending on how black plays. So the king stepped to the side, but now white just builds up before the final break. And of course, all these entry squares covered by white pieces, nothing that black can do here at all. Bishop d2, that's a funny move. I mean, Carlsen doesn't need to wait, but just letting his opponent sweat. And now finally the big break. So f6 is coming. Let's just go through the final moves. So bishop f4, well,
Black is desperately hoping that Carlsen will take an exchange, which would relieve a little bit of the pressure, but no, there's absolutely no need to do this. Of course, if Black takes on f6, then opening the g file is absolutely fatal. g6, and now a simple breakthrough. Bishop takes pawn. And here Hossein resigned. If that's taken, then White piles up on the h-file and mate follows shortly. Well, a very smooth first game from Magnus Carlsen, and indeed the Norwegian team went on to win the match. Let me show you a couple of little sparkling moments from other matches. Well, one of my viewers on YouTube asked me to mention the Brazilian team and what's going on there. Well, I'm going to happy to do that for you. The Brazilian team have two decent players on their team, two very experienced grandmasters, Alexander Fier and Rafael Leitao. Well, Brazil were facing Algeria in round 2, and they had a few uneasy moments in that match. I have to say, they were, well, on paper, clear favourites, but Alexander Fier had a little bit of a problem in his game. So this is quite a well-known variation of the Queen's Gambit declined, as many of you know, one of my favourite openings with Black. And this is a tricky variation against the Bishop f4 system. This is worth looking at. Now here, in this position, Fier captures this Gambit pawn. It's probably safest just to castle here, and well, Black will sooner or later play c5, and with good equalising chances. But Fier took on c7. This is a risky move. He thought for 4 minutes over this move, which suggests to me that he wasn't quite familiar with the theory. In fact, this is quite well known, tricky little gambit. And here you can see White's king is in the middle of the board. This knight is coming out, bit of pressure, and in fact White comes unstuck here. Rook c8, suddenly a nasty check is threatened. Rook c1, Fier obviously thought he had everything under control, but in this position the Algerian player Adlani Arab hit him with knight c2. This is actually quite a well-known trap. Rather unexpected move, very good move. If this knight is taken, then Queen e2 check, and, well, for example, King b1, Queen f1 is going to win the rook in the corner, or Knight d2, Rook c8, and this is a fatal attack. So in this position, Fier had to give up the exchange with Queen d3, that rook in the corner on prise, and here Arab exchanged queens and then took the exchange. Now here, knight and pawn against rook, solid position for White. Black, with good technique, could win this game, but Fier managed to hold on for a draw eventually. It would have been much better to keep the queens on the board with Queen a5 check and then take the exchange. And with queens on the board, this is very difficult for White. So a lucky escape for Fier, and Brazil won that match 2.5, 1.5. They almost blew it. So Brazil did have won their first 2 games, but in the third round they face a really tricky match against China. And let me finish off with my move of the day, which was from the India against Costa Rica match. India have a very strong team, and they won this match comfortably, but well, Bhaskaran Adhiban, who's a very exciting player, almost came unstuck in his individual game. He has the white pieces, Adhiban with the white pieces. Looks very strong, there's pressure against f6 here, but actually a player from Costa Rica, Minero, is actually okay here. He played rook h5, and with so few pawns on the board, in fact, and this threat here, white's king is a little bit exposed. In fact, black is holding this position. But let's see what happens. Okay, first of all, rook g4. Some more pawns exchanged, and the king comes back, and black is still fine here. Black is fine. Too few pawns on the board. But now Adhiban played his last chance. Rook e8 check. Giving up the rook temporarily. He gets the rook back with a skewer. So material's still even here, and if black wants a draw, then of course he can give up his bishop and take here. The best that white can achieve here is rook and bishop against a rook, which, well, should be a draw, a theoretical draw. But black didn't want to suffer. He thought he could draw this game more cleanly with f4. And then after f7, rook f5. And then he was hoping to take the pawn here, come back with the king, and take that final pawn. But here, Adhiban uncorked a beautiful move. Lovely problem move. Bishop f6, nice interference, and this wins for white. Of course, if the bishop takes, then white gets a queen, and in the game black played rook takes, but then rook a6 check, another skewer. And of course, white wins after rook takes rook. It's absolutely hopeless position. So, lovely move from Adhiban there, and India, of course, have won their first two matches. So in round 3, we already get some interesting matchups, so do watch out for my next round report. Thanks for watching.